We're gonna put together a custom loop. Haven't done one of those in a while. The last one we did was a Corsair Hydro X build, and we're gonna reuse a lot of those parts in this one as well, only because my EK stuff didn't ship with a TRX40 block, and that was my fault. So we have a Threadripper 3970X, which is a not 16 core, wow, that's crazy, 32 core, 64 thread CPU. It's insane, look how beefy just the CPU itself is. And we have a pretty killer TRX40 board from Azor here that I'll show you in more detail. This one's gonna be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful system I've ever put together. I'm unsure of whether or not I'm going to custom cool the graphics card. We'll play around with some options, but I really want to custom cool this because this is gonna get pretty hot, especially if we try to overclock with it. So I'm gonna try to keep this into 1 or 2 parts. Bear with me, let's get started. The Be Quiet Straight Power 11 is now revamped with an 80+ platinum rating, meaning you'll stay super efficient at nearly every power load. Enjoy units ranging from 550 to 1200 watts while remaining virtually inaudible thanks to an integrated Silent Wings 3 fan at 135 millimeters. Straight Power 11 units boast a wire-free internal design for excellent heat dissipation and board component integrity for lasting peace of mind in your next system. That's exactly what you want in a power supply. Learn more by clicking the links below. So this here, 3970X, we're gonna go ahead and install this first into our Taichi TRX40 motherboard. This is actually the first time I've ever installed a Threadripper CPU, so you're gonna see how unorthodox it is because these chips are so large and they have to be secured in the socket in such a strange way. Hopefully I don't screw it up the first time. Now, TRX40 Taichi is a peculiar motherboard. Not because it's a Taichi, I love the Taichi lineup, but because it has an interesting VRM cooling solution. So this huge VRM heatsink here, it's super tall, it's taller than the rear IO, has 2 integrated, I think these are what, 40 millimeter, something like that, fans to actively cool the VRM below. Okay, it clicks in. Now I lower this. I don't want to screw this up because, you know, once it's in a custom loop, it's going to be pretty difficult to, get right. I do not have a PCIe 4 NVMe drive at my disposal. Actually, both of them that I did have are in systems that are currently in use. So we're going to have to use a Gen 3 drive. Not that it's really that big a deal. This is a 660p SSD from Intel. It's going to sit just like this. Yeah. Next. CPU block. Now I have no idea what the recommended application pattern is for Threadripper. I'm just gonna assume it looks something like that right there. And what do you think, Nate? Something like whatever's gonna piss off the internet the most. I think this will do. Maybe have it swing back in, make some abstract art. Oh yeah. And we're just gonna go for it. Tie it to the socket. And it looks good so far anyway. So what we're gonna do is test fit most of the things that we know are gonna go in here. And we're gonna use hard tubing. We're gonna use PETG, not soft tubing, because we ain't no bitches. So this isn't like a huge motherboard. You can see it fits the conventional ATX layout with the standard screws, or the standard standoffs. And we have easy access to our rubber grommets for cables. And we'll have plenty of space for that 360 rad up front as well. Oh yeah, just taking a quick break here. Some tech therapy. We got any more of this good stuff? I think we have, oh yeah, we got another one here on the little PCH fan. There she goes. But because it's so narrow, I have to remove this hard drive cage. And that's kind of a shame. There we go. I couldn't slide it any further back either, in case you're wondering, because the power supply we're gonna use, which has orange cables, is too long. Now, I have the radiator currently placed behind these front fans, but I'm gonna move the fans behind the rad and still have them pull air in from the front. All right, so it's a small change of plans. This is kind of how it works with custom loops for the most part. I'm flipping the fans to exhaust air out the front. I know that's weird, but remember this is a partially closed system, so it doesn't really matter where the CPU is, you know, pulling in or exhausting air on the radiator side, as long as it is getting some fresh air from somewhere. And in this case, we'll get it from the back of the case because we're not gonna have anything exhausting air out the back. And the graphics card will also be passively pulling in air from the back of the case, just because, yeah, that's what it does. A lot of cases will do that are around this size. All right, so got all this in there. I want you to picture the reservoir with the D5 pump included. Hey Pepsi, you wanna help me? You wanna help me? I need some help. Can you hold this back here? Hey, can you hold this? Watch, she goes nuts with these little tie straps. Hey, wanna get it? There she goes. So, test fit of the reservoir with the pump. I think we're gonna have it something like this. It's gonna sag a tiny bit because it's not connected with tubes on the other side. The other thing we need to tackle, where's that big kit? Ah, here we go. This big juicy kit of Corsair Dominator Platinum DDR4. Look how sexy. Are you getting a close up on those? We're gonna go ham here. So big thanks to Corsair for hooking us up with a 64 gig kit. But we're just gonna notch them in. I hope I have enough room to notch them in underneath this reservoir because it's pretty big as well. Nate just reminded me again, this isn't as much as Linus, so thanks Nate, really making me feel good about myself. It's the first time I get to play with 8 sticks in the same build, and I'm already being shamed for having only 64 gigs. Dude, it is just beefcakes McGee in here. The thing is that we're only gonna cool the CPU. We're only gonna have 6 connections, right? So we have the connection in the reservoir pump. So there's 2 of those. We have the 2 connections for the radiator, so the 360 mil right up front, and then the 2 connections for the CPU block. So only 3 tubes in total we will have to bend. So what I've done to set up a fill port, I actually used a fill port fitting from Corsair at the top here. The only problem is it's not tall enough. I don't have a long enough extension, G-quarter extension, to get this cap above the little bracket for mounting fans up top. Now it's time to bend some PETG. We're using PETG because I hate acrylic. If you've ever worked with both, you probably know why I'm saying that. Acrylic is much less tolerable when it comes to cutting. It's probably a bit easier to bend, to be frank, but you can cut PETG super fast, whereas with acrylic, you usually have to use like some kind of saw, and it sucks. I've shattered so many acrylic tubes, so let's do it. All right, so that intricate bend I went ahead and tried to tackle first, what you saw in the time lapse. This actually has technically 4 bends to it. So we got the first one coming up from the block, turning right, I guess, from your left orientation toward the front of the case, and then kind of having to do a little S bend to get into that back radiator port there. So we're gonna see if this works. The problem is we're not really gonna know until we cut it down because it's too big and too long to fit in the case as it is. But I've been kind of sizing things up as I've been bending, trying to make sure that at least the prominent bends and the prominent straight lines are straight and not crooked, because that's gonna be a really annoying thing if they're not. All right, so this is the bend, and I have pretty much worked out all the kinks, not to be taken literally. There weren't any of those, fortunately. You just gotta kind of shove the tube in with the fitting already on there. You gotta push this in. By the way, I took the reservoir out. It's just 4 screws onto the little bracket. Actually pretty easy to remove if you ever need some maintenance or whatever. By the way, this is kind of a test fit card. Like I said earlier, we're not gonna custom cool the graphics card. We do have a beefy 2080 Super from EVGA coming in. That's gonna take the place of this card. Hopefully it's not any bigger than this card because we don't have much clearance at all. All right, now from the out port to the radiator, it's literally just a straight tube. And we can kind of adjust the reservoir up and down to align with the height of this port here. Get a shot perfectly from the side here. And you can see we've got that tube very level with the top of the case. That is what we want. Boga's gonna help me now. He's gonna bend some tubes. Hey Boga, you wanna bend some tubes? Anyway, this will go like so. Check clearances, because this almost touches, it actually probably does touch the tempered glass. It doesn't push against it too hard, so it doesn't bend anything. The clearance is pretty much non-existent. You can see I'm pushing on the tempered glass there, and it's actually moving the tubing. Looks good to me. Nate, want to get a shot straight from the side there so you can show them the angles of the bends. I know sometimes this stuff doesn't look very good from certain angles, so builders will only show you certain angles of their system so you don't see the obvious issues with the directions and angles of the tubes. But I think this is pretty good. Even the one back here that we ran from the CPU block to the radiator is, that's awfully tight fitment, but we pulled it off somehow, and actually there's a tad bit of clearance between the tubing, the reservoir, and the VRM heatsink. So, all right, we're gonna clean things up in the back of this system, maybe show you just a quick little time lapse of that, and then we're gonna fill the thing, power it on for the first time, which is not recommended, because if this Threadripper CPU is seated improperly or something along those lines and we have to replace it or move it around, it's gonna suck because we're already getting fluid in the system. We're gonna try it anyway though. Refilling it. So this here is EK Cryo Fuel. It is an opaque coolant like we talked about, so it's probably not gonna last very long in the rig before it starts staining things and kind of clumping up. It tends to be what opaque coolants do, but I don't expect this system will be up and running for very long in its current state. I like to kind of just play with this stuff. Now we have our fill port up top. I did have to cut a small gap here in the honeycomb-like mesh on the top of the 220T, and we're gonna fill it using this little curved straw. All right, and we've got some of the coolant now working its way toward the reservoir. The way this is here with the T-junction, some of it's gonna be falling into the radiator, some of it's gonna fall this way into the res. So we're gonna have to probably flip the case a few times. So I've got a power supply here, an extra one to jump the Molex power for the pump. And we're just gonna have it run at full blast because we're just priming here. We're gonna make sure there aren't any leaks. I don't have any paper towels down, but I'm pretty confident at this point. Let's give it a shot. Oh, it's coming out of the top. Yep, that's okay though. We want to make sure that there's fluid completely covering the pump. Otherwise, the pump's it's basically gonna turn without coolant. The coolant is kind of like the lubricant. It cools the pump itself. And you don't want to turn a D5 pump on without having fluid run through it, and you don't want air mixed in with it either. So that's why I was turning the case this way. But of course, you're gonna cause the fluid in this closed system to move quite fast when the pump is on, and that's why it came out of the top, which I admittedly didn't seal very tightly. So that's okay. All right, so we've got hooked up. This obviously is using an older card. We're gonna replace this with the, remember the 2080 Super from EVGA soon. And then we're also gonna throw a capture card in here. So it'll look a bit different, and we'll probably follow up with actual benchmarks and some crazy tests in a subsequent video, but at least you got to see the build process in this video here. So I'm gonna power it on. I believe everything is wired up. I just wanna make sure that it works. I would like to see a post, because if I didn't seat that Threadripper CPU correctly, we're gonna be f***ed. All right, here we go. Please post. Please.
A few moments later.
Yes! 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 Oh, that would have sucked so bad. Just do a fresh boot of your system before throwing all the custom cooling crap on top of it. It saves you a ton of stress and time, potentially. Oh yeah, gotta get a few extra air bubbles up top we gotta get rid of, but I'd say she's looking pretty dandy. What do you think, Nate? You just put your thumb in front of the wrong part of the camera. By the way, in case you're wondering, this shirt is kind of destroyed. It's a GN shirt, but we were working on the car earlier, and I was like all over the concrete. So came in, worked on this. Glad that it's finished, glad that it's working. And again, we're gonna swap the GPU. We're gonna install the capture card. We're gonna run some killer streaming benchmarks and just see how far we can max out games after we install an operating system. Yeah, system leaked. Like the first time I actually gamed with it, sprung a leak right past the reservoir, so fluid just started pouring everywhere. Fell on top of the graphics card, it fell on top of the basement, and I presume it fell kind of in between where the power supply would be under the basement. It also leaked under the case, so I'm sure fluid got everywhere. I'm not even sure how quickly I realized that it was leaking, because again, I was in the middle of a game, I was playing Modern Warfare, and I glanced over at it. I don't know, it looked like my tempered glass panel was kind of fogging up, and I was like, that's weird. Well, it was doing so because there was actual fluid not in a closed system anymore. It was everywhere else. So I'm gonna show you guys the damage, and brace yourself, it's kind of cringy. Right, so let's talk very quickly about what happened here, what I think happened, and how you can learn from this. The Threadripper CPU was running, I would say, mildly hot when I was stress testing it. Granted, I wasn't stress testing for a super long amount of time, and that's something that obviously we always try to tell you guys to do because something like this could happen. I'm really glad that it was caught early enough, but what I think happened was the fluid temps became too hot after an hour or so of gaming. And that ultimately comes down to heat dissipation in the closed system. I have a single 360 mil rad. Granted, it's only a 25-30 mil thick rad, so it's not very thick, not capable of absorbing and then allowing the fans to dissipate a large enough amount of heat to keep TR4, even at stock, which this was, cool enough. And so yeah, what I think happened was the fluid became too hot, and that just caused the pipe, which was scalding, by the way. All of these tubes were super hot. This is still really hot up here, just to slip out of the fitting. And that's when the fluid was gushing down. That's why it's filled up the table, fell between the cracks underneath the case, and almost leaked onto the carpet. I'm glad it didn't, but could have if it had been allowed to do its thing for a few seconds longer. Yeah, so stress test longer than 5 minutes, okay? Even if it's Prime 95, stress it longer than 5 or 10 minutes, because ideally, in the real world, you're gonna be running these systems under load for hours on end, right? Especially if you're gaming or streaming, or perhaps doing both, it can be very dangerous. The fan curves, if you're wondering, were set to pretty liberal levels. They were allowed to spool up and get rid of that heat if the CPU temps reached, I think, 80 degrees Celsius. I think it was actually set to 75 before they ramped up to about 75%. And then once they hit 80 or 85 degrees, they were at 100% load. What's interesting is I didn't hear the fans spool up that loud. I didn't hear them pass maybe 50-60% load. So what may have happened is the CPU stayed around 75-80 degrees Celsius, but the coolant temps, again, were climbing and climbing and climbing. That could also raise your CPU temps in the long run because you don't have a big enough delta between the fluid temp and the CPU core temps. But I think the fluid temps probably reached 60, 65 C. That's too hot. It's not good for the pump, for one, because the pump needs to be cooled, and it can't be cooled by hot fluid. And for two, this coolant's just not made to operate at those temperatures. I thought I had it set up here, but again, going off of just a 5 or 10 minute stress test isn't really going to give me the full story. And case in point, this is what happens if you don't keep those temps in check. I don't hide anything from you guys. Look, I screw up all the time. I make dumb mistakes. I try really stupid, just crazy combinations of hardware just to see if things would work, what it would take to make those things work. Clearly, this setup is not good enough. Now, your 3970X might be better. You might have a better bin chip. It might not run as hot and thus not allow your fluid temps to reach the levels that mine likely did. So it's kind of a luck of the draw, silicon lottery type deal. Every CPU is going to be different. Heck, every coolant is probably going to be slightly different. If you use different rads, different fan curves, all of that will play a role. But anyway, yeah, you can press F to pay respects. I would appreciate that in the comment section down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I promise you guys this is not a daily occurrence on the channel. I do make mistakes from time to time, but this is probably the first time I've ever had a system full-blown leak on me. I've built about 15 or so custom loops to date, and this is the worst leak, I think, at least while the system was running, that I can remember. So, yeah. See you guys in the comments. Follow me on Twitter and elsewhere, and I'll catch you in the next video. My name's Greg. Thanks for building a system that ends up leaking with me.